Hi everyone. I'm so glad you're able to tune in to this week's Table Talk. We are discussing family roles and structure in the Christian context. Now that is an interesting discussion because it's not necessarily specified in the scriptures. It's not in black and white. Yes, it's there, but we have to talk about what the narrative of the scriptures has to say about it. And we have to talk about the nature and the character of what a godly family is supposed to be. Now, this is extremely relevant for us today. We all face issues that come from family structure, and we see lots of cases of injustice, in the world that we know is wrong, and we see stuff in the Bible that lines up with it, but it's a foggy area. So we're discussing this today. It's me, Jordan, and Taylor at the table today talking about this and talking about this understanding of, what does it mean to be a Christian and to be part of a family? And how are they connected? So thank you for joining us today. And also, don't be afraid to join the conversation. Hop in the comments, say something, ask questions, give thoughts, concerns. We want to hear it. We want to develop this community of conversation. And if you have questions or things that you want addressed that are other topics, you can throw them in there too, and we can try to start up the dialogue. So again, thank you for joining us. So now, let's have a seat at the table.
So how I want to start it off with is that biblically there are several points that the Bible emphasizes on the relationship, especially within families. First being that the husband is, for one, to be submitting to Christ and to God and to lead a family, and also to take care of his family, provide for them, be for them. The wife is supposed to be submissive to her husband as well as just taking care of the children, him, etc. Children are supposed to be submissive to their parents and to learn from them, and vice versa. Parents are supposed to teach and to guide their children. One thing that's always amazing as far as biblical is concerned is the dynamic between husband and wife is very symbolic of Christ and the church. There are many scriptures that it talks about that the church is the bride of Christ. And we can see that by, we even talked about this a little bit of our last table talk, is that, we were talking about husbands to love their wives is basically how Christ loves the church, loving them enough to die for them, loving them enough to always be there for them, sacrifice so much for the well-being of his wife and his family. Something that on the way here, me and Jen are watching a video about just dynamics of family. And there are a few things kind of stood out to me. One being that when a lot of people nowadays, there's usually two split views. It's usually either don't submit to your husbands. It's like you're being defeated, or you're not being strong enough, or blah blah blah. There's a huge misunderstanding of what that means. And then there's a flip side of that, which could be kind of old-fashioned way of thinking, but just also very highly misinterpreted by just modern, is that being in control or being the head of your family does not mean you're abusive. It does not mean that you are dominating over your wife or dominating over your kids. You are basically a servant. You are taking care of them. You're providing for them. You're working for their well-being, whether that's physical, mental, emotional. You're just catering and you're caring for them, much like how Christ was with us. Christ will always, make sure that we're okay. He died on the cross for us to be saved. Like, that huge symbolism there is just, huge. And even as husbands and fathers, we were supposed to submit to Christ. So does Christ submit to his Father and make sure that he's doing everything that the Father commands, and then we do everything, kind of like down the chain of command in a sense. And in turn, even with church, like, we are to look over the church. We are to, guide the church as if, like parents to a kid. And just one other thing that I wanted to point out is, and this may be talked about later, next week's part, from the woman's point of view of it, is in creation. And it's something I did not know was a thing until Jen, my wife, pointed out to me, was that on the sixth day, every single day at the end of creation, God said, and it was good. The 6 days is the only time where it says it was very good. And what happens during the sixth day is man was created. God realized that man was alone. and he created woman. It was very good. He created the completion. He created the unit. He created something that he knew was going to be important. And that was relationship, and that was going to be reliance, and that was going to be constantly being there for one another, no matter if it's hard times, happy times, healthy times, sick times, whatever. Having that connection between husband and wife is immensely important scripturally.
Yeah.
And essentially, the reason why it was very good is because women completed it. Sometimes I feel like there's always this huge thing of like, oh, patriarchy, blah, 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 men, number one. But women is the completing factor. A good godly wife, or a good wife in general, is something that makes every man just feel so much stronger and so much more in control and so much more confident. It's always an old saying of behind every strong man is a strong woman, and I think that's emphasized in the Bible.
I think it's very interesting because we are told in the Bible that when a man dies and he has a wife and he has a family, he is to be judged according to his family's actions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very interesting because we as a church are considered the bride of Christ. He was judged based on our actions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a continuation of the unit that had been created.
Mm-hmm.
It was, no, regardless of what you do, I still love you wholeheartedly, and I give my life for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of unit inside of marriage that he created.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Paul talks about that, and you were mentioning that, what Paul was saying in, I believe it's 1 Corinthians, when he's saying, husbands submit to your wife, or husbands love your wives submit to your husbands.
Mm-hmm.
It's the idea of that kind of loving sacrificial respect for one another.
Mm-hmm.
That is not ever meant to be one way. It's meant to be both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, even as Christ sacrificed himself for the church should also be willing to sacrifice herself for Christ. And it's not saying that, oh, we save Christ. No, it's saying that we love Christ. And it's saying that the same way he loves us, we love him. And the same way he loves us, we love others.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why, to truly love, that's why God said, or why Jesus said, love God, love others. Why? Because Christ set that example, which was love God and love others. And so as we apply that to the family and to the household, we see that as, okay, well, loving God is being in relationship with him, but also as you lead your family, it's leading our family to loving God. And then also loving others sacrificially is now leading does not mean I'm on top. Leading means I'm beneath, supporting, holding up, which is what God does for us. And we're called to follow that same model. And that applies to way more than just the family. That applies to everything, where we are called by God to not support from top down. We're called to support from the bottom up. And that's what true godly leadership is.
Yeah, there's many parts that I believe are misinterpreted because when they're said in the Bible, they're very black and white. Like, men, love your wives, and wives, submit to your husbands. Like, that seems very black and white. But without looking into the past and the different cultures that were there, you can't understand what that meant. It didn't mean, hey, take control of your relationships, be a barbaric leader. It was, no, you have the final say because you are being judged. But when it says to submit to your husband, it's not give up your free will. It is, no, stay your peace if you think he's going the wrong direction, but be willing to follow him when he makes the wrong one.
Yeah. It's faith. It's, putting your trust in that. It debatably, it proves to be more strong that you're willing to submit and to follow than it is to fight. Because even when you were saying they're being judged for their family, it's something of a king and his kingdom, right? A king will always be, looked at for the well-being of his kingdom. If his kingdom is garbage, he's going to be regarded as a really crappy king. If his kingdom is flourishing, happy, and joyful, and prosperous, then he's like, wow, he's doing a great job.
Yeah.
And that same thing, even on a smaller scale of just families. If a family is doing really well, the wife, the kids are happy. Even if the husband is just working day and night kind of thing, but his family is happy, he's regarded as a good husband and a father because of the fact that he's putting everything on the line to take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if, he's just doing whatever and his family basically are not happy, he's not regarded as a good and happy husband and father. He's regarded as he just wasn't there, he doesn't care, he only cares about him for himself, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that a pastor told me one time that I've kept to heart is that, and this is regardless if you're a pastor or if you're just like any kind of working professional or whatever, but in terms of scale of importance, and this might go a little bit into what you're going to talk about later, is, God is number one in terms of when he's, who you love most and who you make time for most. God is number one, your wife is number two, kids are number three, and then if you're a pastor of ministry, and if you're not, just your work is number four. Don't put your wife above God. Don't put your kids above your wife. Don't put your work above your kids. It has to have that hierarchy because God, for one, is everything. Your wife is everything to you on this earth. Your kids are your responsibility, but they do not outrank your wife. And no matter what happens at work, your work will always stay at work. It'll never be at home. Kids always deserve that.
If you look at it this way, so we're all part of the Holy Priesthood, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we are all ministers of God's love and God's grace and God's truth. So as a husband to a wife, your first ministry is to God, and your second is to your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
And then your third is to your children. So it's like you are literally a pastor, which is not language that's used a lot. And I wish it was used more because a lot of people feel like, well, I'm not a spiritual leader for my family. Right. So that's the pastor's job, and and that's their cop out. But literally, I actually did a podcast a while back about, this is a slightly different topic, but it's the same idea, which is the biblical model of teaching, of who is supposed to teach the kids, and it's the parents. That's the biblical model, and not just in the sense of, it happened in the Bible. No, that's the principle that we draw from the scriptures is that God intends for the parents to mentor and teach and raise the kids to show them who and how to become. And so when it comes to spiritual matters, and it is the parents who are the first and foremost ministers to the kids. And in the same way, the spouses are first and foremost ministers to each other. And what's really cool about that is, now I'm going to also bring God into the mix, is that if, it's a God-centered relationship and family, then what happens is God is in each of them, and God is ministering to each of them through each of them. And vice versa, when you are ministering to the other, it is also worship to God. Not that they are God, but that, it's the exact same way that as you sacrificially support and love others, Jesus said, you do it unto me.
Right.
It's that's what he's talking about is, as you are doing that for the least of these, you do it unto me. What he means is if you are doing what I have called you to do, you are worshiping me the absolute best you could do. He's like, that is the epitome of what you could do for me, is to love that. And so when it comes to being a good steward of who are you a minister to, your family is number one.
So dancing, huh?
Yeah. Well, what was you wanting to bring up?
About a year and a half, almost 2 years now, my wife and I, we went on a dance class, and it was actually set up by my church. And it was a couple counseling / dancing, not really a counseling, just more of seeing what the couple inside the Bible looks like. And the basis of it is we learned the basic steps. We didn't go that much into the Bible. And then once we all figured out the steps, they explained why dancing was set up the way it was. And basically the man is to lead and the woman is to follow inside of a dancing. In any dancing scenario, it's the guy who chooses the steps. That doesn't mean that if he doesn't listen to how she wants to dance through her own movements, through her actions, it will make the dance more difficult. We're shown how, in reference to the Bible, we are shown which steps to take. That doesn't mean those are the steps we always take. Inside of a dance, the dance is not beautiful because the steps were perfect. The dance was beautiful because regardless of those steps, she followed. Every misstep, every mistake, she followed with the step, and because it looked fluid, and because they were a unit, they were beautiful and they were awesome. And in the actual Bible lesson that we did was, again, guys are to lead and women are to follow. And they sat down and they focused in on the women. And they said, look, this doesn't mean that you have no say. This is just you giving up a little bit of control to allow him to make you beautiful. Because he's focusing on the steps. He's dodging all the other people. And he's setting up for the next time he can put you in the spotlight. And if it's from a God-fearing and God-loving relationship where both couples believe in God and they honestly want and love each other, then the next step is always to make sure she is beautiful, going from that specific standpoint. And I think that's so powerful because even though she has her own wants and desires, she will get them. But it has to be in a time in which he has found the perfect moment. And that's terrible because a lot of guys have issue with the perfect moment, and all of a sudden it's 10 years later. And we all know there's guys out there who have that issue. But the fact is he's looking for that moment. It's not the fact that he doesn't want to give it to you. It's the fact he's waiting for that time. And maybe he's not strong enough for it. But at that time, it's just not the right time. And if you try to step out of the path that he chooses, right or wrong, it messes it up. And that's when it's shown as a mistake. It's only when you guys are out of sync that the dance is messed up. I can't tell you how many times Holly and I have danced. And we have messed up the steps every single time. But someone came up and said that it looked wonderful. And it's because regardless of it, we loved each other. We were in the moment together. We messed up the steps, but we followed each other. And that's how it is. It's just the guy has to be willing to sit down and listen. Yeah. But on the other side, she has to be willing to accept the final answer.
I think I want to, because we're nearing the end here, I want to call out, well, not the end, but I want to call out what you were just saying right there about they follow each other, because I think that's key. The way in which they follow each other is different. So it's not to say that one is superior to the other, but that the way in which they dance is different, but it's one. And I think that's the image that needs to be drawn. And I think that over the years, it hasn't been. So like the background that I've got for, the discussion of man versus woman, basically, is it's painted by what I've seen and the stories I've heard in seminary while I have where I have a lot of classmates who are women, who have, like, some of them are much older than me, and they've gone through persecution, basically, of not being permitted to be a pastor and minister. And that's a whole different discussion, but it stems from this. It has stemmed from, well, because man is over woman, woman cannot teach, woman cannot preach, etc. And so if that is the case, it asks more questions. And so I think that, and this, again, I wish we had more time, but I will let it sit with this, that we understand that the value which God places on each human being is the same. That there is no partner in the relationship with more weight, with more value, with more superiority. There's none of that. there's neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free. You know, it's like that is not what makes, I mean, there is no difference in that sense. There is no difference. And so when we approach these issues, it needs to be done, one, humbly, you know, not already up to arms and ready to impose on others. Because that's the key, is that it's not, hey, I need you to submit to me. It's no, I choose to submit to you in the way that I need to submit to you. I ask that you submit to me the way that you need to submit to me. But there's never, it should never be a force. It should never be,
That's an awesome way to put it.
you know, it should never be, basically, love imposed or force is not love.
Yeah.
Simply put.
Yeah,
And
that's an awesome way to put it.
and the whole relationship should be nothing but love.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Yeah, the topic of family dynamic is certainly an interesting one. Whether you're going at it from a cultural standpoint, whether modern or historical, whether it's geographical, you know, from the Americas to the Middle East to the Asias, Europe, all of that, or you're going at it from a pure biblical standpoint. People talking about it will always have a slightly different opinion about it, but that's what makes the conversation fun. Next week, we're going to have a part 2 going from the female side of things. They're going to go over the same topics, but through different eyes. And in the future, we're going to have more videos kind of relating to the same topic. Down in the description below, you'll find our Instagram, where we have posts every Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday. And you'll find our Twitch account down below as well, where we stream different video games and content, having amazing theological conversations, or just having fun with one another every Sunday from 7 to 9 Eastern Standard Time. So again, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like it if you did, subscribe if you really liked it, and hit the bell notification just to make sure that you get updates on whenever we post a video. All right, and as always, don't forget to smolder.